The thermometer on my porch read -8 degrees Fahrenheit when I woke up that February morning in Lakewood, Colorado, and my fingers were so numb I could barely hold my coffee mug. My name is Ryan Perkins, and I had just moved into the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision 6 months earlier, thinking I had found the perfect place to settle down after my divorce. The house was modest but comfortable, a 2-story craftsman with a small yard and a fireplace that I was about to become very familiar with. That morning, I learned that comfort and HOA regulations don't always go hand in hand. The power had gone out around 3 in the morning. I woke up shivering under 3 blankets, my breath visible in the moonlight streaming through my bedroom window. The heating system was electric, and with the power grid down across half of Jefferson County, I had no choice but to fire up the wood-burning fireplace in my living room. I had stocked up on seasoned oak and maple logs back in November, precisely for emergencies like this. By sunrise, I had a decent fire going, enough to keep the downstairs livable. The news on my phone showed that the polar vortex had pushed further south than meteorologists predicted, and power companies were scrambling to restore service. They estimated it would take at least 48 hours, maybe longer. I texted my sister in Denver to let her know I was okay, then settled in with a book near the fireplace, wrapped in a sleeping bag. Around 10 in the morning, someone knocked on my door. Hard. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s standing on my porch, wearing a puffy white jacket and holding a clipboard. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that radiated disapproval. Behind her stood a man about the same age with a camera around his neck. "Ryan Perkins?" she asked, though she was already checking something off on her clipboard. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Hutchinson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board." "This is Gerald, our compliance officer. We've received multiple complaints about smoke coming from your property." I blinked at her. "You mean from my fireplace?" The HOA bylaws clearly state that wood-burning fires are only permitted between the hours of 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. on weekends and holidays. It's currently 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. She said this like she was reading me my rights. The power is out. It's -8 degrees. I'm keeping my house from freezing. That doesn't change the regulations, Mr. Perkins. Gerald, document the smoke. Gerald stepped past me and took several photos of the smoke drifting from my chimney. I stood there in disbelief, cold air flooding into my house. This is insane. This is a legitimate emergency. Brenda pulled out a pre-printed form from her clipboard. "You're being issued a citation for violation of Bylaw 7.3a. The fine is $300. If the violation continues, it will be $300 per day until compliance is achieved." "You want me to put out my fire? In this weather? With no power? I want you to follow the rules that you agreed to when you purchased your home. You signed the HOA agreement, Mr. Perkins. Ignorance is not an excuse." She handed me the citation, spun on her heel, and walked back to a white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway. I stood there holding the paper, watching my breath fog in the air, absolutely stunned. Behind me, I could feel the warmth of the fire, the only thing keeping my pipes from freezing and bursting. I looked down at the citation again. $300 for keeping myself alive during a winter emergency. I closed the door and went back to the fireplace, crumpling up the citation and tossing it into the flames. There was no way I was putting out this fire. Not for Brenda, not for the HOA, not for anyone. The next day, I received another citation, hand-delivered by Gerald at 9 in the morning. Another $300. The power was still out. The temperature had dropped to -12 overnight. I had slept in my sleeping bag right next to the fireplace, feeding logs into it every few hours to keep the heat going. "This is criminal," I told Gerald as he took more photos. "You people are actually going to fine me for not freezing to death." "I just document the violations, sir. Take it up with the board." "Where's Brenda?" "At the community center. The board is working there today." "The community center has power. It has a backup generator for emergencies." He said this without a trace of irony. After he left, I sat down and did some research on my laptop, running it off my car's power inverter since my house battery backup was running low. The Meadowbrook Hills Community Center was a sprawling facility built 5 years ago, complete with a gym, meeting rooms, a kitchen, and a large event space. It served the subdivision's 300 homes and was the crown jewel of Brenda's HOA empire. I also discovered something interesting while reading through the property records and HOA documents. The community center's backup generator wasn't owned by the HOA. It was leased from a company called Rocky Mountain Power Solutions, and the service contract was extensive. More importantly, I found out who had installed it: me. Well, not personally, but my company. I owned a small electrical contracting business called Perkins Power and Electric. We had installed that generator 3 years ago, before I even lived in this neighborhood, back when I was married and living in Aurora. I had done the work myself, pulled the permits, programmed the automatic transfer switch. I knew that system inside and out. And I still had the master override codes. The power came back on that evening around 6 p.m. I immediately cranked my thermostat up to 72 and stood in front of the heating vent, letting the warm air blast over me. Then I checked my mail and found a certified letter from the HOA. I was being fined $900 total for 3 days of violations, and if I didn't pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. I called the HOA office the next morning. A receptionist answered, and I asked to speak with Brenda. "Mrs. Hutchinson is very busy." "What is this regarding?" "This is regarding the completely insane fines she issued me for using my fireplace during a power outage." "One moment, please." I waited on hold for 5 minutes before Brenda picked up. "Mr. Perkins, I have nothing further to discuss with you. The violations were documented, the fines are valid, and if you wish to contest them, you can file an appeal with the board. The next meeting is March 15th. That's over a month away. Then I suggest you pay the fine and avoid future violations." "Brenda, I was keeping my house from freezing. My pipes could have burst. You could have gone to a hotel. You could have gone to a shelter. You chose to violate HOA regulations instead. Now I'm very busy and this conversation is over." She hung up on me. I sat there for a long moment, phone in hand, feeling something shift inside me. I'm generally a pretty easygoing guy. I don't like conflict, I don't like drama, and I usually try to see both sides of any situation. But there's a limit to how much nonsense a person should have to tolerate, and Brenda had just blown past that limit like it didn't exist. That night, I drove over to the community center. It was closed, but several cars were still in the parking lot, including Brenda's white Lexus. Through the windows, I could see lights on in what I knew was the board meeting room. I sat in my truck for a while, thinking through what I was about to do. The generator was housed in a concrete enclosure behind the building, surrounded by a chain-link fence with a padlocked gate. I had the key, not because I had kept it from the installation, but because the HOA had called my company 6 months ago for emergency service, and nobody had asked for it back. I had kept it on my keyring without really thinking about it. The generator was a Generac 150 kW unit, big enough to run the entire community center plus some exterior lighting. The control panel was inside the enclosure, protected from the weather. I unlocked the gate, slipped inside, and pulled out my phone for light. The system was password protected, but I had set those passwords. I logged in as a technician and navigated to the automatic transfer switch settings. The generator was set to kick on automatically if utility power dropped for more than 10 seconds. I changed that setting to manual-only mode. Then I went into the maintenance schedule and disabled all automatic testing. Finally, I cleared the event log so there would be no record of my changes. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. When I was done, the generator would never start automatically again. It would only run if someone manually pressed the start button, and even then, only if they knew to switch it out of maintenance mode first. I locked everything back up and drove home, my heart pounding but my conscience surprisingly clear. Brenda wanted to play hardball over safety during an emergency. Fine. Let's see how she liked being on the other side. 2 weeks went by. I paid the $900 fine because I didn't want them putting a lien on my house, but I paid it with a check that had "paid under duress" written in the memo line. I also filed an appeal for the March meeting, though I had zero faith it would go anywhere. The weather warmed up into the 40s and life returned to normal. I worked my jobs, came home, and tried not to think too much about the HOA situation. But I kept my fireplace wood stacked and ready, and I kept an eye on the weather forecast. On March 8th, another cold front moved in. This one wasn't as severe as the February freeze, but it was enough to drop temperatures into the teens at night, and the forecast called for snow. More importantly, the forecast also called for high winds, and Colorado winds had a habit of knocking down power lines. Sure enough, on March 10th, around 2 in the afternoon, the power went out again. This time it was only affecting certain areas, and the power company estimated a 6-hour restoration window. I was at a job site in Littleton when it happened, wrapping up an installation for a client. I got a call from my neighbor, an older guy named Tom who lived 3 houses down. "Ryan, you might want to get home. That HOA lady is going door to door checking for fireplace smoke." "You're kidding me." I wish I was. "She's got some poor guy with her writing down addresses." "Looks like she means business." I thanked Tom and finished my job, taking my time. When I got home around 4 p.m., there was another citation stuck to my door, even though I hadn't even been home to light a fire. According to the form, my property had been observed with probable smoke emissions at 3:20 p.m. I took a photo of the citation and sent it to my lawyer, a woman named Patricia who had handled my divorce. She called me back within an hour. "Ryan, this is harassment. Tell me about it." "No, I mean legally, this could constitute harassment. You weren't even home, so there's no way you were burning anything. She's just targeting you now. Have you had any other interactions with this woman?" I filled her in on the February incident and the fines. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to document everything. Every interaction, every citation, every phone call. Second, you're going to file a formal complaint with the HOA board about Brenda's conduct. Third, we're going to send them a letter indicating that further harassment will result in legal action." That sounds expensive. The initial letter won't be. If it escalates, we'll deal with that then. But Ryan, these HOA people usually back down when they realize someone's actually going to fight back. I agreed and hung up, but I wasn't confident. Brenda didn't strike me as the backing down type. The power came back on around 8 p.m., just as estimated. I made dinner and tried to relax, but I kept thinking about that generator sitting behind the community center, completely disabled, waiting for the next real emergency. I didn't have to wait long. On March 14th, the day before the HOA board meeting where my appeal would be heard, a major winter storm rolled into Colorado. The Weather Service issued blizzard warnings for the Front Range, predicting 18 to 24 inches of snow and winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. The storm was expected to last through the night and into the next day. I prepared my house the way any sensible person would. I made sure my pantry was stocked, charged all my devices, filled my bathtub with water in case the pipes froze somewhere in the system, and got my fireplace ready with plenty of wood. I also filled my truck's gas tank and made sure my snow shovel was accessible. The storm hit around noon. Snow fell so thick I could barely see across my street. The wind howled like something alive, rattling windows and piling snow into drifts against houses and cars. By 3 p.m., we had at least 10 inches on the ground and the temperature was dropping fast. At 4:30, the power went out. This time, I knew it was going to be a long outage. The combination of heavy snow and high winds meant down power lines all over the metro area. I got my fire started immediately, not bothering to check the time or what day it was. If Brenda wanted to come out in a blizzard to cite me for keeping warm, she was welcome to try. I settled in for the evening, monitoring the news on my phone. The storm was worse than predicted, with some areas already reporting 30 inches of snow. Roads were closed, travel was impossible, and the governor had declared a state of emergency. Around 7 p.m., I got a text from Tom. Community center is setting up as emergency shelter. No heat or power, though. Generator won't start. I read that message 3 times, feeling a cold satisfaction settle over me. The community center was dark and cold, and they couldn't figure out why. I texted back asking if anyone was there. Brenda and the board are there with about 20 residents. They called the power company, but no idea when they can get someone out in this weather. I sat by my fire, warm and comfortable, imagining Brenda in that cold building, unable to help the residents who had come seeking shelter. Part of me felt guilty. There were innocent people there who needed warmth. But another part of me, the part that had been fined $900 for not freezing to death, felt absolutely no sympathy at all. An hour later, Tom texted again. They're asking if anyone knows about generators. Someone remembered your company installed it. I didn't respond. Another hour passed. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but it had a local area code. I answered. Is this Ryan Perkins with Perkins Power and Electric? Who's asking? This is Gerald from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. We're having an emergency at the community center. Our backup generator won't start and we have residents here who need shelter from the storm. Can you come take a look at it? In a blizzard? Sorry, Gerald. I don't do emergency calls in weather like this. Too dangerous. But people need help. Yeah, well, people needed help in February too, and your HOA president fined them for it. Tell Brenda I said hello. I hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Brenda. Mr. Perkins, this is a life-threatening emergency. We need your help getting this generator running. I don't think I can help you, Brenda. You installed this system. You must know something about it. I installed it 3 years ago. Have you called the manufacturer? They have a 24-hour support line. We tried. They can't get anyone out until the storm passes. Then I guess you're in the same boat as everyone else. Mr. Perkins, there are children here, elderly people. This is not the time for petty revenge. That word, petty, it made something snap inside me. Petty. You fined me $900 for keeping my house warm during a freeze. You cited me when I wasn't even home. You've harassed me for months over safety issues. And now you want my help. I was enforcing the rules. Rules that could have killed me. Rules that put regulations above human safety. So no, Brenda, I'm not coming out in a blizzard to save your community center. You figure it out. I hung up and blocked her number. The guilt came later, around midnight, when I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those families at the community center, cold and scared. I told myself it wasn't really my responsibility, that Brenda had brought this on herself, that they could call the fire department or find another solution. But I still felt like garbage. I got up and paced around my house, the fire burning low in the fireplace. I could fix the generator in 5 minutes. Just drive over there, punch in the codes, switch it back to automatic mode, and everyone would be warm and safe. But that would mean letting Brenda win. That would mean all her harassment and nonsense was okay, because I would still come running when she needed me. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the snow fall in the glow of my neighbor's emergency lantern. The street was buried, cars reduced to lumps under white blankets. Nobody was going anywhere tonight. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Perkins, this is Sandra Chen. I live at 445 Oakmont Drive. My kids are at the community center and they're freezing. Please, if you can help, they're really scared." Then another text from another number. "Ryan, this is Martha Cunningham from the board. I know Brenda has been hard on you, but we really need your expertise. Can we please talk?" Then another and another. Somehow my number had gotten out and desperate residents were texting me, begging for help. I turned off my phone. The next morning the storm had passed. The sun came up on a world buried in snow, sparkling and pristine and utterly impassable. I used my snowblower to clear my driveway, a process that took almost 2 hours given how much snow had fallen. The news said we had gotten 32 inches, a near record for March. The power was still out across most of Lakewood. My house was cold, so I got the fire going again, past caring about HOA regulations. I made breakfast on a camp stove and tried not to think about the community center. Around noon, Tom came trudging through the snow to my front door. "You need to turn your phone on," he said. "I don't think I do." "Ryan, the fire department evacuated the community center last night. They transported people to a shelter in Golden. Everyone's okay, but it was close. A couple of the elderly folks had hypothermia." I felt my stomach drop. "Is anyone hurt seriously?" "No, they got them out in time." But people are angry. They're angry at the HOA for the generator not working, and they're angry at you for not helping. At me. This isn't my fault. I know that, and you know that, but Brenda's been telling everyone you refuse to help out of spite. She's painting you as the villain here. Of course she is. Tom looked at me for a long moment. "Did you do something to that generator, Ryan?" I didn't answer. "Because if you did, you might have really crossed a line. I get why you're mad at Brenda, believe me, I do. She's been a tyrant since she got elected. But if you sabotaged emergency equipment that put people at risk, that's a whole different thing." He was right, and I knew it. I had been so focused on getting back at Brenda that I hadn't fully thought through the consequences. People could have died. Kids could have died. "I need to fix this," I said. "Yeah, you do." I got dressed in my warmest clothes and drove my truck toward the community center, plowing through snow that nearly reached my bumper. The roads hadn't been plowed yet, and I passed several stuck cars and one jackknifed semi. It took me almost an hour to drive what should have been a 10-minute trip. The community center parking lot was empty except for one truck with fire department markings. I parked and made my way to the generator enclosure, my boots sinking deep into the snow with each step. The gate was unlocked, probably left that way by whoever had been trying to troubleshoot the system the night before. I opened the control panel and saw immediately that someone had tried to force it to start, pushing buttons randomly and probably making things worse. I logged into the technician interface and switched the system back to automatic mode. Then, I reset the maintenance lockout and cleared all the error codes that had accumulated. The whole process took 3 minutes. I pressed the manual start button, and the generator roared to life. Lights came on in the community center. I could hear the HVAC system kicking on, fans and compressors whirring to life. Heat would be flowing through that building in minutes. Did you just get that working? I turned to see a firefighter approaching from the building, a woman in her 30s with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Yeah, it was stuck in maintenance mode. Simple fix. Thank God. We've been trying to get that thing started since last night. Are you with the power company? No, I'm the electrician who installed it. I live in the neighborhood. She studied me for a moment. You're Ryan Perkins. That's me. The HOA president said you refused to come out and help. The HOA president has been harassing me for months, but I'm here now. Well, better late than never, I guess. Though it would have been better if you'd come last night when we actually needed you. She didn't sound impressed. I didn't have a good response to that, so I just finished checking the system and closed everything up. The firefighter went back inside and I stood there in the snow, feeling like the world's biggest jerk. I drove home, parked in my cleared driveway, and went inside to face whatever was coming. I didn't have to wait long. Around 3 p.m., there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies standing on my porch. Ryan Perkins. Yes. We need to ask you some questions about the generator at the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center. Can we come in? My mouth went dry, but I stepped aside and let them in. They introduced themselves as Deputy Martinez and Deputy Kowalski. Martinez did most of the talking. Mr. Perkins, we've received a complaint from the HOA president, Brenda Hutchinson, alleging that you sabotaged the backup generator at the community center, resulting in endangerment of residents during last night's storm. I didn't sabotage anything. But you did access the generator system. I installed that generator. I did maintenance on it. I had legitimate access. When was the last time you accessed it? I could lie. I could say it was months ago during a service call. But I was a terrible liar, and these were cops trained to spot deception. 2 weeks ago. And what did you do during that access? I explained about changing the settings to manual mode, disabling the automatic transfer. I explained about the HOA fines, about Brenda's harassment, about my frustration with the whole situation. So you intentionally disabled emergency equipment because you were angry at the HOA, Deputy Kowalski asked. I disabled a generator as a form of protest. I didn't think there would be another major storm. I didn't think people would go there for shelter. But they did, and several people nearly got hypothermia because of your actions. I know, and I fixed it this morning as soon as I could get there. The deputies exchanged glances. Martinez pulled out a notebook. Mr. Perkins, I'm going to be straight with you. What you did was reckless and potentially criminal. The district attorney is going to review this case and decide whether to file charges. Those charges could include reckless endangerment, criminal tampering, possibly others. You're looking at serious legal consequences. My legs felt weak. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Intent doesn't always matter when it comes to consequences. People were put at risk because of your actions. A child could have died. After they left, I sat on my couch for a long time staring at nothing. I had screwed up. I had let my anger at Brenda override my common sense, and now I was potentially facing criminal charges. My business could be ruined. I could lose my electrician's license. I could go to jail. I called Patricia, my lawyer. She listened to everything, asking occasional questions, her tone getting more serious as the story went on. Ryan, This is bad. This is really bad. You admitted to the deputies that you intentionally disabled the generator. Yes. Okay, first rule of law, don't talk to the police without a lawyer present. But we're past that now. Second, we need to start building your defense immediately. What defense do I have? I did it. Your defense is that you were retaliating against systematic harassment by the HOA, that your actions were meant as a protest, not to endanger anyone, and that you immediately rectified the situation once you understood the consequences. We can also argue that the HOA shares responsibility for not maintaining proper backup plans and for creating a hostile environment that led to your actions. Will that work? I don't know, but it's what we have. The power came back on that evening. The streets were slowly being plowed and life was starting to return to normal. But for me, everything had changed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the looming legal consequences. 2 days later, I received a summons to appear before the HOA board for an emergency meeting regarding my dangerous and criminal actions. The meeting was scheduled for March 17th, and attendance was mandatory. I showed up with Patricia. The meeting was held at the community center, in a large conference room that was packed with angry residents. I recognized some of them from my street, neighbors I had waved to and made small talk with. Now they looked at me like I was a monster. Brenda sat at the head of a long table with 4 other board members. She looked triumphant, like this was the moment she had been waiting for. "This emergency session is called to order," she announced. "We are here to discuss the actions of Ryan Perkins, who deliberately sabotaged our community center's backup generator, putting dozens of residents at risk during a life-threatening storm." Patricia stood up. "I'm Patricia Marsh, legal counsel for Mr. Perkins. Before we proceed, I want to state for the record that this meeting is inappropriate given the pending criminal investigation. My client should not be compelled to discuss these matters in a public forum. This is an HOA matter, not a legal proceeding," Brenda said. "Mr. Perkins violated multiple community guidelines and put lives at risk. The board has the authority to levy fines, restrict access to community amenities, and recommend further action." "You're conducting a kangaroo court," Patricia said. "And anything said here could be used against my client in criminal proceedings." Then, perhaps Mr. Perkins should have thought of that before he decided to play vigilante with our emergency equipment. The meeting went downhill from there. Residents stood up one by one to condemn me, to talk about how scared their children had been, how cold they were, how they had trusted the community center to be there in an emergency, and it had failed them. One woman cried while describing her elderly mother's hypothermia symptoms. I wanted to disappear into the floor. The only person who spoke in my defense was Tom. He stood up and told the board about the harassment I had experienced, the ridiculous fines during the February freeze, the citation when I wasn't even home. "Brenda has been targeting Ryan for months," Tom said. "She's used the HOA rules as a weapon, fining him for literally trying to stay warm during a power outage. What he did was wrong, but let's not pretend this happened in a vacuum. Brenda created this situation." "How dare you?" Brenda said, her face flushing red. "I enforce the rules equally for everyone." "That's not true and you know it. You've let dozens of violations slide for people you like while hammering anyone who questions your authority." Other residents murmured in agreement. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had problems with Brenda's leadership. The board voted to fine me $5,000 for endangering the community and to ban me from using any HOA facilities for 1 year. They also referred the matter to their attorneys to explore additional civil remedies. I paid the fine because I had no choice, but it wiped out most of my savings. Combined with the legal fees I was racking up with Patricia, I was facing financial ruin on top of potential criminal charges. The district attorney filed charges 3 weeks later. 1 count of reckless endangerment, 1 count of criminal tampering with property, and 1 count of criminal mischief. If convicted on all counts, I was looking at up to 4 years in prison and substantial fines. My arraignment was set for May 2nd at the Jefferson County Courthouse in Golden. I showed up in a suit, feeling like I was walking to my own execution. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with rows of benches and a judge's bench at the front. The prosecutor was a serious-looking woman in her 50s named Kathleen Morrison. I pled not guilty, and the judge set a trial date for August 15th. Bail was set at $20,000, which I barely managed to post using my house as collateral. The next few months were a nightmare. My story made the local news, and suddenly I was infamous throughout Lakewood as the HOA revenge guy. Some people thought I was a hero, standing up to tyrannical HOA overreach. Others thought I was a dangerous criminal who had risked children's lives over a petty dispute. My business suffered. Several clients canceled contracts, not wanting to be associated with someone facing criminal charges. I had to lay off my part-time assistant and take on all the work myself just to keep afloat. Patricia worked tirelessly on my defense. She interviewed witnesses, gathered documentation of Brenda's harassment, and hired an expert witness to testify about the generator system and how easily it could have been returned to working order. She built a narrative of a man pushed to the breaking point by an authoritarian HOA president who valued rules over human safety. During discovery, we uncovered something interesting. In the weeks before the March storm, 3 different residents had complained to Brenda about the community center's emergency preparedness. They had asked about the generator, about backup heating, about shelter protocols. Brenda had dismissed all of their concerns, saying the generator was maintained according to manufacturer specifications, and that they were worrying over nothing. We also found out that the HOA's contract with Rocky Mountain Power Solutions had lapsed 6 months earlier. The generator hadn't received its scheduled maintenance, and nobody on the board had noticed or cared. If they had maintained their service contract, a technician would have been available to respond during the storm. Patricia filed a motion to dismiss the charges, arguing that the HOA's own negligence had contributed to the situation and that I shouldn't be held solely responsible. The judge denied the motion, but it got people talking. The trial started on a hot August morning. The courtroom was packed with residents from Meadowbrook Hills, media representatives, and curious onlookers. I sat at the defense table next to Patricia, trying to look calm while my stomach churned. The prosecution went first. Kathleen Morrison painted me as a vindictive man who had endangered innocent people, including children and elderly residents, in a childish act of revenge against the HOA. She called witnesses who testified about the cold night at the community center, about their fear and discomfort, about the hypothermia cases. One woman broke down crying on the stand while describing how her 8-year-old daughter had asked if they were going to freeze to death. It was brutal to watch. Then Brenda took the stand. She was composed and professional, describing her role as HOA president and the importance of maintaining community standards. She talked about the citations she had issued me, framing them as simple enforcement of established rules. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical. "Mrs. Hutchinson, the bylaws prohibit wood-burning fires between specific hours. Is that correct?" "Yes. And this rule exists for what reason? to prevent excessive smoke and maintain air quality in the neighborhood, not for safety reasons. Air quality is a safety concern, but there's no exception in the bylaws for emergencies. The rules don't specify exceptions. So during the February freeze, when Mr. Perkins's power was out and the temperature was -8 degrees, he was supposed to just accept freezing in his own home rather than violate your air quality rules. He had other options. Hotels, shelters. During a regional emergency when thousands of people were without power, you think hotels had available rooms? I don't know. You didn't check, did you? You didn't consider whether Mr. Perkins actually had alternatives before fining him $900. The rules are the rules. Let's talk about rules, Mrs. Hutchinson. Your HOA had a service contract with Rocky Mountain Power Solutions for the community center generator. When did that contract expire? Brenda shifted in her seat. I'm not sure of the exact date. Let me help you. September 15th of last year. Almost 6 months before the March storm. Why wasn't it renewed? Budget constraints. We planned to renew it in the new fiscal year. But you didn't. And because of that, no technician was available during the storm. If you had maintained your service contract, the generator issue could have been resolved quickly, correct? That's speculative. Is it? The service contract included 24-hour emergency response. That's not speculative, that's contractual. Patricia introduced the expired contract into evidence, then moved on. Mrs. Hutchinson, several residents raised concerns about emergency preparedness before the March storm. Did you take any action on those concerns? We reviewed our procedures. Did you test the generator? I don't personally test equipment. Did you have anyone test it? I assumed it was functioning. You assumed. So when residents came to the community center seeking emergency shelter, you hadn't verified that the emergency systems actually worked. We had no reason to believe they wouldn't. Except for the fact that your service contract had lapsed and you hadn't performed any maintenance or testing in 6 months. The judge sustained an objection from the prosecution, but the damage was done. Brenda left the stand looking rattled. When it was the defense's turn, Patricia called a series of witnesses who testified about Brenda's pattern of harassment. Tom talked about the citations during the February freeze. Another neighbor described being fined for parking his truck in his own driveway overnight, violating some obscure bylaw. A third witness talked about Brenda threatening to fine them for having the wrong color mailbox. A pattern emerged of an HOA president drunk on power, wielding rules as weapons against anyone who crossed her. Then, Patricia called me to the stand. I was terrified, but I told my story as honestly as I could. I talked about the February freeze, about trying to keep my pipes from bursting, about Brenda showing up to cite me while I was literally trying not to freeze. I talked about the $900 fine, about the citation when I wasn't even home, about feeling harassed and targeted. Why did you disable the generator, Mr. Perkins? Patricia asked. I was angry. I felt powerless. Brenda had all this authority and she was using it to punish me for trying to stay safe. The generator felt like a way to push back, to show her that she wasn't invulnerable. Did you intend to endanger anyone? No. Never. I thought maybe the power would go out for a few hours and Brenda would be inconvenienced. I never imagined there would be a major storm or that people would go there for shelter. If I had known, I never would have done it. When you learned that people were at the community center, cold and in danger, how did you feel? Sick. Horrified. I wanted to fix it immediately, but the storm was so bad I couldn't get there. It's the biggest regret of my life. The prosecution's cross-examination was tough. Morrison hammered me on the fact that I had made a choice to disable emergency equipment. that I knew how serious Colorado winter storms could be, that I should have anticipated the consequences. She was right about all of it. I had no good answers. Our expert witness testified that the generator system was designed with multiple safeguards, and that any qualified technician could have restored it to working order in minutes. He argued that the HOA's failure to maintain their service contract was the primary cause of the prolonged outage, not my actions. The prosecution's rebuttal witness, another generator expert, testified that disabling safety equipment was inherently dangerous regardless of how easily it could be fixed. Closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. Morrison gave a passionate speech about community responsibility, about the social contract we all enter into when we live together, about how one man's anger had put innocent lives at risk. Patricia countered with a story about proportionality, about an HOA that valued rules over humanity, about a man pushed to the breaking point by systematic harassment. She argued that while my actions were wrong, they were understandable, and that the HOA bore significant responsibility for creating the situation. Ryan Perkins made a mistake, Patricia said. He let anger cloud his judgment and people were put at risk. He owns that. He's apologized. He fixed the problem as soon as he could. But let's be clear about who really failed the Meadowbrook Hills community that night. Brenda Hutchinson and her board failed to maintain emergency equipment. They failed to prepare for a storm everyone knew was coming. They failed to verify that their shelter was actually functional before telling people to come there. Ryan Perkins disabled a generator, but the HOA's negligence is what left people in the cold. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I barely slept, barely ate, just waited for the verdict that would determine whether I went to prison. On Monday afternoon, we got the call. The jury had reached a verdict. We assembled in the courtroom and the forewoman stood to read the verdict. Criminal tampering, guilty. Criminal mischief, guilty. Reckless endangerment, not guilty. It was a split verdict. I had been convicted on the property crimes but acquitted on the most serious charge. Patricia squeezed my hand. It was better than it could have been, but I was still facing up to 2 years in prison. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Patricia filed a motion for probation instead of prison time, citing my clean record, my remorse, and the mitigating circumstances of HOA harassment. While I waited for sentencing, something unexpected happened. A group of Meadowbrook Hills residents, led by Tom and about 30 others, filed a petition to recall Brenda from the HOA board. They cited her mismanagement of the generator situation, her harassment of residents, and her failure to maintain proper emergency protocols. The petition gained steam quickly. More and more residents came forward with stories of Brenda's authoritarian behavior, of unreasonable fines and selective enforcement of rules. Local news picked up the story, framing it as a referendum on HOA overreach. The recall election was held in early October. Brenda lost by a landslide, removed from the board by a vote of 243 to 57. A new president was elected, a retired engineer named David Chen who promised transparency and common-sense rule enforcement. One of David's first acts was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA. He refunded my $5,000 fine and issued a statement saying that the board recognized their role in creating the conflict that led to the generator incident. It didn't change my criminal conviction, but it felt like some measure of justice. My sentencing hearing was on October 26th. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Barbara Patterson, listened to arguments from both sides. Morrison asked for jail time, arguing that property crimes with potential for harm required serious consequences. Patricia asked for probation, presenting letters from residents supporting me and emphasizing my cooperation and remorse. Judge Patterson took a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Perkins, what you did was dangerous and foolish. You allowed your anger to override your common sense and people were put at risk. Children were put at risk. That is unacceptable, regardless of your frustrations with the HOA. However, I've reviewed all the evidence in this case, including the HOA's own failures in maintaining emergency equipment and their pattern of harassment toward you. I've read letters from your neighbors describing you as a good person who made a terrible mistake. I've considered your lack of criminal history and your immediate efforts to fix the problem once you understood the consequences. On the charge of criminal tampering, I sentence you to 18 months in the county jail, suspended with 2 years of supervised probation. On the charge of criminal mischief, I sentence you to 1 year, suspended, concurrent with the first charge. You will perform 200 hours of community service to be completed within the probation period. You will pay restitution to the HOA in the amount of $2,000 for emergency response costs, and you will maintain employment and stay out of legal trouble. Mr. Perkins, if you violate the terms of your probation, you will serve the full jail sentence. You understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then I hope I never see you in my courtroom again." I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I could breathe for the first time in months. No jail time. I would keep my freedom, my business, my life. The conviction would stay on my record, but I could live with that. The community service ended up being oddly appropriate. I was assigned to help winterize low-income homes in Jefferson County, installing insulation and weather stripping, checking heating systems, making sure people wouldn't freeze during the next winter storm. It felt like penance, like I was making up in some small way for what I had done. The new HOA board rewrote several bylaws, including the fireplace regulations. The new rule allowed wood-burning fires anytime the temperature dropped below 20 degrees or during power outages lasting more than 2 hours. They also established a proper emergency preparedness committee and renewed the service contract for the generator. Brenda moved out of Meadowbrook Hills about 3 months after the recall. I heard she bought a condo in Aurora, somewhere without an HOA. I never saw her again. My business slowly recovered. Some clients came back once the trial was over and they saw I wasn't going to prison. Others remained skeptical, but I built my reputation back job by job, being professional and reliable and proving I wasn't the villain the news had made me out to be. Tom and I became good friends. He helped me complete some of my community service hours, and we had a lot of long conversations about what had happened, about anger and consequences, and how easy it is to let emotions override judgment. You know what the crazy thing is? I told him one evening while we were installing insulation in a basement. If Brenda had just used common sense during that first freeze, none of this would have happened. If she had said, "Okay, this is an emergency, do what you need to do," we wouldn't have ended up here. "That's the problem with people like Brenda," Tom said. "They get a little bit of authority and they can't resist abusing it. They need rules to be absolute because it makes them feel powerful." Well, she's not powerful anymore. No, she's not, and the neighborhood is better for it. I finished my probation without incident. 200 hours of community service, 24 months of check-ins with my probation officer, staying employed and out of trouble. It was tedious but manageable. On the day my probation officially ended, I went to the community center. David Chen was there for a board meeting, and I asked if I could address them. They agreed. "I just wanted to say thank you. I told the 5 board members. "Thank you for making changes after everything that happened. Thank you for being reasonable about emergency situations. And thank you for giving me a chance to move forward." David nodded. "We're the ones who should be thanking you in a weird way. The generator situation exposed a lot of problems with how this HOA was being run. We've made a lot of improvements since then. Better communication, more transparency, rules that actually make sense. You paid a heavy price for it, and I'm sorry about that, but some good came out of it." I left the community center feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. 2 years after the whole incident, I was doing well. My business was thriving. I had paid off my legal debts, and I had even started dating someone, a teacher named Rachel, who thought the whole HOA story was simultaneously horrifying and hilarious. I still lived in Meadowbrook Hills. I thought about moving after everything that happened, but I realized I liked my house, I liked my neighbors, and I didn't want to be driven out by bad memories. This was my home. One Saturday morning in February, almost exactly 3 years after the first freeze, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in his 30s holding a clipboard. "Mr. Perkins, I'm Josh Martinez, the new HOA compliance officer. I just wanted to introduce myself and let you know I'm doing quarterly check-ins with all residents." My heart rate spiked, old anxiety flooding back. "Compliance officer?" "Yeah, I make sure everyone's doing okay, see if there are any issues with their properties that need addressing. It's a new position the board created, more of a helpful resource than an enforcement thing." "That's different." "Yeah, we're trying to be more community-focused. Anyway, I noticed your downspout on the east side is a little loose. Might want to fix that before the spring rains. No fine or anything, just a heads up." "I'll take care of it, thanks." He smiled and walked to the next house. I stood in my doorway, watching him go, marveling at how much had changed. An HOA compliance officer who was actually helpful. Who would have thought? That evening, I built a fire in my fireplace just because I could. The weather was cold but not freezing. No emergency, no power outage. I just wanted the warmth and the comfort of the flames. According to the new bylaws, I was well within my rights. Rachel came over with dinner, and we sat by the fire, eating and talking and laughing about nothing in particular. She knew my whole story, all the ugly parts, and she had chosen to be with me anyway. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Not the getting caught part, but the actual thing you did." "Every day," I said. "Not because I went to trial or got convicted, but because I put people at risk. Kids were cold and scared because I was angry. That's something I have to live with. But you learned from it." "I learned that revenge feels good for about 5 seconds, and then it ruins your life. I learned that there are better ways to fight back against unfair authority. I learned that anger is a terrible decision-making tool. Those are good lessons, expensive lessons." She kissed me. "The best ones usually are." The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, snow was starting to fall, light flakes drifting past the window. The weather forecast called for 3 to 5 inches overnight. Nothing major, nothing to worry about. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Power company says there might be outages tonight with the snow. Want to come over if you lose electricity? We have a generator." I smiled and texted back that I was good, but thanks. I had plenty of firewood, plenty of blankets, and a house that was mine, warm and safe and free from HOA citations. I had learned my lesson about revenge, about consequences, about the importance of thinking through your actions before you commit to them. But I had also learned something else. I had learned that sometimes, when pushed far enough, ordinary people push back. Sometimes they push back stupidly, recklessly, in ways they regret. But the pushing back matters. It exposes problems, forces changes, makes tyrants face consequences. Brenda was gone. The HOA had reformed. The rules made sense now. And while I wouldn't recommend my methods to anyone, I couldn't entirely regret that those changes had happened. The fire burned low, and I added another log, watching the flames climb and dance. Rachel dozed on the couch beside me, her head on my shoulder. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the neighborhood in white. Somewhere in the subdivision, the community center sat warm and bright, its generator properly maintained and ready for any emergency. The backup systems worked. The shelter protocols were in place. If another storm came, people would be safe. I had made a terrible mistake, paid a heavy price, and learned lessons I would carry for the rest of my life. But I had also survived, rebuilt, and moved forward. And on cold February nights, when the snow fell and the fire burned, that felt like enough.